Hello and welcome to this next video in the Clinical Research Basics series. So this time we're going to be looking at what is GCP. So if you've got no idea what I mean when I say GCP, don't worry, we will explain it all. So I hope you enjoyed the video. So we're going to look at GCP under three different headings. We're going to start off with the definition. What is it? What do we mean when we say GCP? Then we're going to talk about a specific document which is known as ICH GCP, because that's the one that most people think of when they talk about GCP. So I'll just explain what that is and where it's come from, and also talk about the other different legislation that is in place. And then finally, we're going to look at what the key principles are. So what does ICH GCP say? What does GCP mean in practice? So what do we have to follow? GCP stands for Good Clinical Practice, but don't get confused with general clinical practice. This is about research. So when we talk about good clinical practice, it's not about clinical practice in the routine medical setting. It's about good clinical research practice. So maybe what we ought to call it is GCRP, but that doesn't roll off the tongue quite as easily. It should be good clinical research practice, probably. But that's not the term that is generally used. There are some people that do refer to it as GCRP, but most people, just because it's easier to say, we talk about GCP. But just remember that it is about research, not about routine clinical medical practice. And this is the definition of GCP. So it is a standard for the design, conduct, performance, monitoring, auditing, recording, analysis and reporting of clinical trials that provides assurance that the data and reported results are credible and accurate, and that the rights, integrity and confidentiality of trial subjects are protected. So that's the official definition, but really what it means is that GCP is about first and foremost protecting patients and the people involved in taking the medication and doing the research, and also making sure that the data that we generate are as accurate and complete as possible. When people talk about GCP, they often mean ICH GCP. So I just want to explain what ICH is first, and then we'll look at ICH GCP. So ICH is the International Council on Harmonisation, and it's an international group made up of representatives from regulatory authorities and the pharmaceutical industry across the world. Originally, it was the US, the EU and Japan who were involved, but other countries have got involved since as well. So most countries in the world accept ICH. The idea behind this organisation was to harmonise marketing authorisation requirements for medicinal products. So we are only talking about medicinal products here. They don't cover medical devices or any other kind of research. It's just about research involving medicinal products. And the idea was to reduce the timeline and cost that it takes to get a medicinal product onto the market, and also to reduce subject exposure to investigational products. So in other words, drugs that don't have a marketing authorisation, where we don't know what the effects are going to be. So again, it's about protecting patients. One of the documents that ICH produces is known as ICH GCP. Its official title is ICH E6, Good Clinical Practice. So that's how you can find it. And there are 8 chapters in this document. So chapter 1 is the glossary, which has definitions of the main terms that we use, including a definition of GCP. Chapter 2 is the principles of GCP, which includes subject protection, data quality. Then we have 3 chapters on responsibilities of the various groups. There will be another video in this series that talks about who all these people are, the ethics committee, the investigator and the sponsor, and also some of the other people involved. So have a look at that one if you want to know more about those. But the responsibilities of these 3 key groups are outlined in chapters 3, 4 and 5. And then chapters 6, 7 and 8 are about documentation. So the protocol is the methodology for the research. The investigator's brochure is information about the medicinal product. And essential documents are all the documents that we generate when we run a clinical trial. ICH GCP is the gold standard for GCP globally, but you need to be aware that there is also legislation in place in the different regions globally. So just some examples here. In the European Union, we have a clinical trials regulation which applies across the EU. In the USA, there's a Code of Federal Regulations, Title 21, and Part 312 is the main piece of legislation governing GCP in the US. And then in the rest of the world, each country will have its own local legislation. So wherever you're working, you need to be aware of the legislation that applies in your region or country. So as we've already said, there are two key principles of GCP. The first one, and the most important one, is the protection of trial participants, so the protection of those who are taking part in our clinical trials. A close second to that comes the quality of the data that we generate. These are some of the things that we do to protect participants. So these are some of the requirements of ICH GCP that help us to know how we can protect patients. So the first one is Ethics Committee review. So the Ethics Committee review the ethics of the research and whether it is ethical to do this trial in this patient population. Informed consent protects patients by giving them information that they need in order to make a decision whether or not to take part in the clinical trial. The investigator has responsibility for participant welfare, and that means their overall welfare, not just the clinical trial. Protocol design will affect the protection of participants by designing a protocol that builds in patient protection into the protocol. Safety reporting is reporting of potential side effects, which again will protect participants, because if the side effects are not appropriate given the condition that we're treating, then we can stop the trial as soon as we work out that that's the case. And the sponsor has responsibility for oversight and monitoring of the clinical trial, including participant protection. The other part of GCP is the quality of the data. So these are the things that are required by GCP to help ensure the quality of the data that we're generating. So protocol design, again, will have an impact on data quality because we need to design a protocol that collects the right data in the right way. Data management is the way that we look after the data, the way that it's entered into the system, and the way that queries and discrepancies are resolved. Again, sponsor oversight and monitoring should include oversight of the data and the quality of the data and resolution of any errors that we find. Data verification is checking the data that we're collecting against the patient records and making sure that they match. And that again helps to ensure the quality of the data and means that we can pick up any errors and make sure that they're resolved. The statistical analysis plan needs to be established before we start the trial. So we say right at the beginning how we're going to analyse the data. And then the final study report is a requirement. Even if the results are negative, we still have to publish a report, and that should talk about how we've managed the quality of the data as well. These are some more key principles of GCP, and these are ones that are relatively new and are being established in updates to ICH GCP particularly. So one principle that the regulators are very keen on now is involvement of the participants, potential participants, and also potential investigators in clinical trial planning. There's also a big move towards a risk-based quality management approach in clinical trials. So we assess what the risks are and then we put in place plans to manage those risks. And then the sponsor and the investigator remain responsible for the clinical trial. They might delegate tasks and duties. They might delegate to an external vendor or an external company, or they might delegate to internal staff, but they still retain responsibility for the trial regardless of who's actually doing the work. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, please do subscribe and click the notifications bell so that you get notified of new videos that are coming up. And if you need more in-depth training on GCP, then please check out my Regulations and Guidelines online course. I'll put a link in the comments below so you can take a look and see if you think it's the right course for you. But thank you very much for watching. Have a great day.